Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. Today, I want to take you to Galena, Illinois, April 16th, 1861. 4 days earlier, soldiers from the seceded state of South Carolina fired on the federal garrison holed up inside Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor, igniting the Civil War. In Galena, a massive crowd of citizens gathered inside the town's courthouse to discuss the opening of hostilities and what they were going to do about it. One of the things they discussed was forming a military company, a scene that played out across the United States and the Confederate States. 2 days later, on April 18th, the citizens of Galena held another mass meeting. In the crowd on that night was a former U.S. Army captain. His name was Ulysses S. Grant, who, after being dismissed from the military, had struggled to find himself. He had moved to Galena 18 months earlier, hoping to get a fresh start in the family's tanning business. Some of the townspeople looked to Grant for help. West Point educated, one of the few folks in town with a military education. While he was in the crowd, another person in the crowd, a local lawyer, politician, and U.S. representative named Elihu B. Washburn, and along with the support of another man there that day, another local lawyer, a man named John A. Rawlins, and others, got Grant elected chairman of the meeting. Another man present is pictured here. He's the name that I dare say you don't know. His name is August Louis Chetlain, and he told the story of the meetings, those two meetings on April 16th and April 18th, and recalled Grant's participation in them. Chetlain did this in his 1899 memoir, Recollection of 70 Years. I want to read a passage from Chetlain's book. It's really fascinating. In it, you'll learn how Chetlain became the first recruit in the Galena company and about Grant's involvement. So let's get into it. Here we go. In Chetlain's own words, a mass meeting, he says, of the citizens of Galena was held at the courthouse on the evening of the 16th of April, 1861, 4 days after the firing on Fort Sumter, to discuss the situation and the feasibility of raising at once one or more companies of volunteers to aid in the suppression of the rebellion. The courthouse was filled with citizens. The mayor of the city, Honorable Robert Brand, was chosen to preside. Upon taking the chair, in a brief speech, he gave expression to anti-war sentiments and favored compromise and peace. Indescribable confusion followed, and a motion was made that he vacate the chair. The chairman begged permission to be heard and said in explanation that he had understood the meeting had been called to discuss the situation and that he had given expression to his own views and opinions, but as they evidently were not those of the meeting, he would vacate the chair. After some discussion, it was agreed that he continued to preside. The Honorable E.B. Washburn, that's Elihu, member of Congress, being present and one of the leading spirits of this war movement, offered the following resolutions, which were unanimously adopted. So here they are. Number one, remember, these are the citizens of Galena, and they state in their first resolution that we will support the government of the United States in the performance of all its constitutional duties in this crisis and will assist it to maintain the integrity of the American flag whenever and wherever assailed. The second resolution, that we recommend the immediate formation of 2 military companies in this city to respond to any call that may be made by the governor of the state. And the third resolution, that having lived under the stars and stripes by the blessings of God, We propose to die under them. Strong words. The passage by Chetlain continues. Spirited and patriotic addresses, he says, or writes, were made by the mover of the resolutions, by John A. Rawlins, of course, to become the trusted lieutenant of Grant. Other men, B.B. Howard, Honorable Charles S. Hempstead, and others. The meeting adjourned with the wildest enthusiasm and cheers for the Union. The excitement following the gathering seemed to increase, and on the evening of the 18th of April, this is that second meeting 2 days later, another mass meeting was held in the same place to raise a military company. The crowd at the courthouse was greater than at the first meeting. Captain U.S. Grant, formerly of the United States Army, who had been a resident of Galena for 18 months, was, at the suggestion of Honorable E.B. Washburn, elected chairman of the meeting. Here's Grant in Galena at the courthouse. Huge crowd of people. Now he's elected to serve as the chairman. He steps up and he's going to take the chair and say a few words. Chetlain continues. Upon taking the chair, he briefly, with some evident embarrassment, stated the object of the meeting. Earnest and eloquent appeals to the patriotism of the audience were made by E.B. Washburn and John A. Rawlins. Those two men, very comfortable speaking in society. Grant, not so much. When volunteers were called for, Chetlain continues, I headed the list and was followed by Wallace Campbell, J. Bates Dixon, Nicholas Roth, C. H. Miller, and some 25 others. These enlistments proved to be the first in the Northwest outside the city of Chicago. A telegram was sent to Governor Yates, that's Richard Yates, offering a company of volunteers, which was at once accepted. It was decided before the close of the meeting to push the recruiting vigorously. Captain Grant, Rawlins, and Rowley agreed to go the next day to Hanover, 14 miles south of Galena, and Campbell and Dixon volunteered to go to Dunleith, now the town of East Dubuque. With Washburn and S.K. Minor, I took the city and its suburbs, the men who had enlisted the evening before, giving valuable assistance. Okay, so now they're spreading out across their section of Illinois and looking for recruits. The meeting of citizens at Hanover, the evening of the 19th, that's only a day, 24 hours after the second meeting in Galena, was addressed by Captain Grant and Rawlins. So now we have Grant and Rawlins actively recruiting outside Galena. Chetlain continues, some 12 men were obtained. My math, we're about 37 right now. Captain Grant told me afterwards that his Hanover speech was the first one he had ever made. That would be his first recruiting speech, his second speech, if you count the remarks he made when he was elected chair of the Galena, the second Galena meeting. Rawlins spoke of it as an earnest and sensible speech. Campbell and Dixon, two of those other recruits, recruited themselves, about as many at Dunleith. On the morning of the 20th, 2 days after the second meeting, it was found that over 80 men had been recruited and all were on hand to answer the roll call. Notice was given that in the afternoon, a meeting for the election of officers would be held. Captain Grant, having understood that there was a movement to elect him captain of the company, told me that he could not accept the captaincy of a company of volunteers, that he had been educated at West Point, had served in the Mexican War as a lieutenant and afterwards as a captain on the Pacific coast, and that with his military education and experience, he ought to have the colonelcy of a regiment or a suitable staff appointment. He suggested that I take the captaincy of the company and that he would go with the company to Springfield and assist it in getting into a regimental organization. The result was that I was elected captain and Campbell and Dixon first, and second lieutenants, respectively. On the morning of the 21st, the company was full. So that's the conclusion of the passage where Chetlain, Augustus Chetlain, talks about those initial meetings in Galena, the follow-up recruitment by Captain Grant and others, and Chetlain getting the nod as captain, the endorsement as captain by Grant, who was looking to do more with his West Point education and Army experience to help the country. Now, you might wonder what happened to Chetlain. Well, that company that he was captain of became part of the 12th Illinois Infantry, and Chetlain soon advanced to lieutenant colonel. He distinguished himself in the Battle of Fort Donelson, February 1862, and following the battle, received a promotion to colonel of the regiment for gallantry. Grant steps in and elevates him to brigadier general and assigns him the task of organizing and training U.S. colored troops. That happens in early 1864. Chetlain ended the war as a major general in 1866, went on to serve Grant as a consul, and was active in business and philanthropy. He lived a long life, dying in 1914 at age 89. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.